Imagine fighting for a cause you believe all your life. Dedicated long, sleepless years, working multiple jobs, coming from humble beginnings, and creating a trilogy of books that becomes a sensation, not only in your country, but translated into 37 different languages. Imagine never being able to see that success, never knowing the popularity, and being known for not the good works you did that you really strove for, the dedication that you did all your life, but for the work that happened and was published posthumously. Today, we're going to actually talk about the story of this person, Stieg Larsson, and his Millennium trilogy. Hello, and welcome back to the library. And before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to introduce my guest today for this episode, the Proctor of Poesy and the Kindle King himself, Mr. Andrew Kenney. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Phil. Thanks for having me back.
And if I didn't butcher that by just completely going into like my own kind of stammering, I wanted to make a joke here that every single time you're back on it, I want to increase on your title, the Kindle King.
Just a new name every time, and then half the podcast is just going to be introducing me.
I mean, hopefully, for the 100th time you're on here, it's going to be like that. Now, when we briefly chatted about our topic today, I was curious to know how much you knew about Stieg Larsson and his work. And yes, I checked the pronunciation. It's Stig, like the master marauder in that British television program about middle-aged men explaining their midlife crises through cars basically nobody can afford. And yes, I am a big fan of Top Gear. I will say that.
Yeah, you and my grandmother. Good.
I mean, yeah. I don't even know Cars. It's just an entertaining program until it wasn't.
I just remember seeing clips on that with them just talking about cars and watches. And it's like, oh, two things that I know zero about. So,
do you know why the three main people from Top Gear was fired by any chance?
No.
Oh, it's because Jeremy Clarkson punched the producer in the face.
Oh, he pulled one of those.
Yeah, rightly so, it seemed like. Everything about it was that he wanted a nice warm meal after a really hard day of work. And he was promised that. And he didn't get it.
If it's in the contract.
And the place where it happened, it was in Italy, if I remember correctly, has a plaque now saying where the fracas that ended Top Gear. So, I mean, one of these days we'll see it. But
Here lies the punch.
So, Carl Stig Erland Larsson was born on August 15th, 1954. He was the son of Erland Larsson and Vivian Larsson nee Bostrom. He was born in the locality of, and bear with me for all these, Skelleftehem, which is located in Skellefteå municipality, which is in Västerbotten County. Those are just letters mashed up together for our English languages listeners. Sorry. What is important is to know that he was born in the far northeast of Sweden and in the northeast corner, basically as northeast as you can get until you are absolutely in the middle of nowhere, and he kind of is in the middle of nowhere. What is also important is that the locality he lived in has just over 3,000 people as of 2010.
Okay, little small middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, we live kind of in the middle of nowhere in Vermont, but like even St. Albans has more than 3,000 people.
Indeed,
So,
indeed.
I don't know. Sweden is not known for being in the middle of nowhere until it is.
Yes.
The town is known for three things, Andrew. Okay, the first one is Stieg Larsson. The second one is the 1997 Playmate of the Year, Victoria Silverstedt.
Not as exciting a name based off of every other name we're going to talk about today. I was hoping for something a little bit harder to pronounce.
And the third one is Ronskar, which is a metallurgic plant located on the peninsula right outside of town in the Baltic Sea. And it might have been originally an island, and then it was built into peninsula. But all you need to know is that Stig's father, Erland, and also his grandfather, Severin, worked in this smelting plant.
The real smelting pot of Sweden.
But this is where his father suffered from arsenic poisoning. I know. A lot of fun happening here. He had to quit his job because of the arsenic poison. Again, when we talk about bringing jobs into America, remember the phrase, you had to quit your job because of arsenic poisoning. Remember this.
Will do.
At least they had free healthcare even back in the 50s, I believe, or something similar to it. Stieg was very little at this time. He was a newborn. He was basically about as old as my daughter is at the point. When his parents had to move to Stockholm.
This part I read about a little bit. Continue on. I want to hear more about this.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about Sweden in the 50s, Sweden wasn't like exactly the wealthiest socialist nation that we know today. Like much of post-war Europe, it took quite a bit of time to recover the economic devastation of the the DOS, even though Sweden wasn't invaded. And I'm going to put this in quotations. They were a quote-unquote neutral country. I say this because Stig's parents moved to Stockholm when housing stock was very low and work was very difficult to find all throughout the country. The family moved into what was described as a small rented room that was too small for the three of them overall.
That's the part I read. It's like, and I don't know, what would it say? It was like, oh, like I think they left him, like, well, you'll go into this more, but when he was 1, it's like they don't have room for the 1-year-old. The smallest member of the family they couldn't find room for.
No, they did not. When Stieg was only a year old in 1955, he moved to his grandparents' house outside a town called Norrjo. Close enough, which is far in the north, but basically right in the center of the country. So north center. Think about it that way. I pointed up into the sky and then centered myself, so at least Andrew knows what I'm talking about.
We're really painting a picture here, folks.
His father, when interviewed after Stig's death, said that this was a pretty common arrangement at the time, being sent to your grandparents, which I'm almost willing to believe.
I guess it's like daycare, but it never ends.
He stated that Stieg really had a good time living up with his grandparents, which I'm definitely willing to believe. During the long winter months, he would cross-country ski to school, which I already envisioned that all young Scandinavian kids did to begin with.
Yeah, like ride the back of a musk ox or cross-country ski, go down an ice luge, I don't know.
Like the team of reindeer helped him every single time he did. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
you had to watch out for the flying moose and hockey pucks, which I mean used to be a problem in Vermont. Thank God for climate change, right? Ooh. Right. His parents originally wanted for him to come back earlier than he did, right? But his grandmother, according to his father, insisted that he was better off living in the country. I don't blame her for thinking that.
Yeah, I think that, well, you gave me him at 1, and now you want him back. I would question it, too. I don't know.
Well, the weird thing, right, Andrew, is that in 1957, his brother Joachim was born. His brother would stay with his parents. So maybe they found a better living arrangement after all, or they just decided that they wanted him.
I guess we'll keep one of them.
I'm sure this didn't estrange young Stieg from his parents. I'm sure it didn't estrange him from his brother. His brother also claims that the trips to his grandparents and his brother that he barely met were some of the fondest childhood memories, which I can completely believe from him, like as long as childhood memories go. The family finally reunited after Severin, the grandfather, passed away. When Stieg was 8 or 9, depending on who you asked, Severin died of a heart attack at the age of 50.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, thank you. Which on this podcast is the canon, the sexiest of all literary devices. He moved back to his nuclear family. I guess eventually we're going to have to make that a fucking canon thing.
Yep.
Who were residing in the city of Umeå. Best guess there. Still located in northeastern Sweden. Stieg shared a room with his brother where they had bunk beds, and Stieg would also tell his little brother stories, which seems very normal, honestly, for people who end up being in the writing career. This is where it Joachim claims he knew his brother would end up being a fantastic writer. His father stated that he encouraged his kids to read all the time, particularly the detective stories, which were his favorite. His father was working as a janitor at that point in a movie theater, and his brother said that they would spend many evenings watching all the movies they possibly could. A lot of them R-rated, as he claimed, which I believe. I wouldn't doubt that as living in northeastern Sweden. What else are you gonna do?
Yeah, ride the moose to the movie theater and have a grand old time.
Yeah, seriously. His parents got him his first typewriter when he was 12, on his birthday actually, which was expensive at the time and beyond their budget, and the typewriter had to be paid off in installments. However, even at a young age, he would spend all night writing in a furnished room his parents made for him in the basement, so the constant clanking of the keys wouldn't disturb the family, at least according to his father. Now, I have to add here that both Erland and Joachim have ulterior motives on painting this idyllic childhood and stating that the family were closer with when Stieg was younger. This will become clearer later on, but Stig's lifelong partner will explain that, at least later in life, he wasn't as close to his family as they want to portray. On Stig's own account, he much preferred living in the country rather than living in Umeå, and his partner believes that living with his grandparents was in some part the motivation of a setting of a large portion of the trilogy in northern Sweden that he would write. Right
what you know about.
Exactly. And I didn't put this down on paper, but according to her, I remember reading that she absolutely despised northern Sweden, which is pretty hilarious to me. She said it was like hell on earth or something of the sort. She's not from there.
Yeah,
right?
Evidently.
What I'm willing to believe fully is that his father and mother were heavily influential in guiding Stig's with his political leanings. His parents were active in their union and would discuss things like the Vietnam War, the famine in Biafra, and the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia to their kids. Though I'm not exactly sure what they were talking about, what is true is that Stieg would become an active political person basically as soon as he possibly could, and sometimes in a very badass way, which we will discuss later.
Sounds good.
Stieg was a good student in grade school, from at least what his father would say, and he was known to be a meticulous human being with his details, right? He would stargaze just for fun as a kid when his parents got him a telescope, and this is an example of his meticulousness from the journal entries. January 2nd, 1968. We researched Uranus without success for 15 minutes.
It's hard to find mine in 15 minutes, too.
Dude, that was literally the only one they picked in the article. There was no other one in the article.
It's the only one they can see from Sweden, I guess.
They could have picked any other one. They knew what they were doing. Larsson and his teens also became a huge science fiction fan. Again, checking out Uranus. Writing science fiction stories, but most importantly, he became a publisher of several fanzines, which I learned basically today what a fanzine was. It's just an amateur magazine. And he did this as early as 17 or 18 years old and was even the president of the largest Swedish sci-fi club by the time he was 24 or 25, respectively, in 1978 and 1979. But jumping a little bit here, who do you expect would be in the largest science fiction Swedish fan club? What a statement.
Watch out, ladies.
Here I come.
Yeah.
At 18, in 1972, Stieg graduates what we in the United States would equate as high school. In Sweden, he received his secondary diploma in social sciences. Basically, around 14 or 15, you can elect to go to this high school. I'm not going to even bother pronouncing this name for 3 years. It's an election, but 99% of people go. That's literally enrollment rate, 99%. And then you get to go to specific courses that you want to take, as well as taking general courses. For example, business management and economics program would have some courses similar to child and recreation program, similar to industrial tech program, just to name a few that aren't as as crazy. It just felt like I wanted to ground people. Honestly, there are some that sounded
It's like
nuts.
vocational school or something similar.
Yeah, but like social sciences would be a huge encompassing thing,
Yeah.
right? And that's the most popular program. I think as of to this day, about 20% of students go to it. 19% in 2018 is what I wrote down. Stig applied to the Joint Colleges of Journalism, but he failed the entrance exams. Instead, in 1974, at the age of 20, he was conscripted to the Swedish military. Mandatory conscription has been something in Sweden basically for ever, I guess, like for a very long time. And it really just depends on the state of the world and the wars that are happening that like mandatory conscription exists. After the invasion of Ukraine by the land-grabbing Russian government, they reinstituted conscription, citing this invasion directly because they didn't have it for a few years there when we were younger.
Yeah. I was surprised to hear. Sweden wouldn't have been the first place I thought of jumping off for mandatory, but I guess Russia's a good or bad an excuse as any, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think Finland, which is obviously on the direct border, Sweden doesn't actually have a direct border of Russia, but
Right.
And Norway probably has it, but I'm just literally saying stuff without knowing anything, but I'd assume both of them have something similar too. Stig trained as a mortarman, so shooting mortars, in the infantry based in southeastern Sweden, which is nicer than northeastern Sweden if you think of warmth. Marginally.
Yeah.
Side note, today, people who worked in this position are known to have high rates of CTE due to the persistent subconcussive blast. That's just something I feel like people don't talk about. Like mortars and like those kind of like things have subconcussive blast. And like that is where a lot of the CTE, the medical studies are coming from.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff. And like, same thing with like, I'm sure there's a lot of hearing loss and maybe even vertigo, shaking your crystals. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Absolutely. Shortly after his 16th month's compulsory military service, Stig decides he wants to travel, basically backpacking through northern Africa and Spain. This is his father quoting his travels. Quote, Stig was an early backpacker. Among other things, he worked as a dishwasher in Africa, and once he was forced to sell his leather jacket that his dad bought him to afford to travel home from Algeria. On another trip, he illegally entered Spain, and he was hunted down by Franco's army. Franco's fascist army, guys. That's not easy. You want any comments on that one?
That's all these people we always talk about just have like very interesting lives, and I mean, I guess that's part of the reason we talk about them. But just like, what's on your resume? Well, I gave a beloved leather jacket to get back home. I got chased by an army. The normal.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it says Algeria, but I'm sure Libya came up at one point, and this is Gaddafi's Libya too. So. Who knows? I don't want to just spew that. He might have never had anything to do with Libya, but if you know anything about this time period in war, fucking Gaddafi is in everything. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Gaddafi even brought in the Black Panthers to have a conversation with them. So, like, he did everything in his power to just do whatever he fucking wanted.
He's the evil Forrest Gump.
I guess, yeah. He's the North African Forrest Gump. I mean, he did bad things. Don't get me wrong. He definitely did evil things. Moving on. Of course, we were worried, according to his father. Once he was gone longer than usual, he had malaria and couldn't be contacted. Then one day, he suddenly stood there in the door and he said, "Hi, Dad," skinny and miserable with jeans and as thin as cobwebs.
No leather jacket. No, just Jesus. I can't imagine. Like, I know it's out there, trust me, but like, malaria must be the worst.
I mean, malaria used to be endemic in this country.
Yeah.
Before we started murdering all the mosquitoes, which is one of the only reasons why we should, but not necessarily up where we live.
Yeah.
But yeah, down in the southeast. Again, but that wasn't necessarily endemic before the European settlements as well, mm-hmm. which is another thing that we need to state. But yeah. Moving on. Here's where I'm unsure of what happens next after the travel. One source says he worked as a photographer. Another says he worked in the post office for a few years. I'm willing to believe that he worked at both at one point, mixing and matching here and there. In his early 20s, Larsson started engaging in leftist political activism, becoming a member of the Communist Workers' League. I intentionally left out the Swedish word of this because I absolutely couldn't read this. He also shared his feminist beliefs and would have these firm beliefs, never putting women's rights second to leftist causes, which is something we see often. I'm not going to get into the tirade, but like a lot of times when it comes down to women's suffrage or women's beliefs, it just ends up being something that people don't continue with. 1 second. It says right here, but I digress, which is a great place to add right into.
Yeah.
Stieg was also not a toe tipper. He became an editor for the Swedish Trotskyite journal, just known in English as the Fourth International, which we don't need to cover why it was called the Fourth International. Just know that there was 3 internationals beforehand.
4 usually comes after 3.
In 1977, at the age of 23, Stieg traveled to Africa again. This time he traveled to Eritrea, where he trained a squad of female guerrilla fighters on how to shoot mortars and fire grenades.
Okay. That's like I don't this dude just has a wild and wacky life already.
I feel like if you just don't have any fucks to give, right?
Yeah, yeah. Ladies, gather around, cover your ears, we're gonna fire some shit off.
These fighters were part of Eritrea's People's Liberation Front, which, if you ever known anything about any kind of Monty Python sketch, just think about that when it comes down to the life of Brian. We're not Eritrea's People's Liberation Front. We're the People's Front of Eritrea. It's also known as Shabia. Sorry, I don't speak Arabic. It was a Marxist-Leninist organization at the time, or at least at the point where he was there, because it changes in the 80s, who was actively fighting during the Eritrean War of Independence, which, again, too complex to get into this guy. Absolutely not getting into that one. This is what one of the friends who also traveled with him said about Stieg on the ground when Stieg was there. Stieg was a revolutionary socialist, and he believed in a better life and equality for all. The fact there was crushing poverty in Africa appalled him. He went there to aid the struggle. That meant, in the end, being involved in fighting, and he faced live bullets. He was an amazingly courageous man. He told me a lot about it, but never boasting. A lot of what he saw left me deeply shocked, end quote. Stieg would go to Eritrea and return home suffering a kidney inflammation, which is what he basically was the reason why he brought him there. And he finally, had to stay home after that because he would go there and come back once in a while.
Okay.
When he finally returned home for good, he got a job at Sweden's largest news agency. And I'm going to try to do my goddamn best on this, but it's Tidningarnas Telegrambyrå. I'm going to hand this to you and show you what this is. It is right about there.
Yeah. That sounds, whatever you said, I'm nodding my head, everybody.
It's just
I barely speak English.
Right. I suffer from the lack of American English.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
TT is what I'm going to refer to it as.
If this was America, half these towns he's lived in would be called Springfield. So
we literally stole half the towns from England anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
He would work at TT from 77 to 99 as a graphic designer for the most part. He would continue to work in the newspaper world until his passing, but before we continue down his professional life, we have to backtrack a little here because in 1974, Stieg fell in love. He met a woman named Eva Gabrielsson, don't know how it is pronounced in Sweden. By all accounts, this couple was in love and would seem to be, for lack of a better term, soulmates. Eva is currently alive and is an architect, author, political activist, translator, and a feminist herself, working along literally all his life alongside him. To ground Eva into the Lost in the Library canon, she translated Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle into Swedish, which, wild.
Yep.
We will talk more about her in the podcast later, but for now, just know that 3 years before he went abroad to Eritrea to teach female fighters how to be badasses, they were already living together. They would live together for the rest of his life. It is also known that in the mid-20s, our protagonist made a subtle change that made all the difference to him. He changed his name. Now, rather, he didn't change his name altogether. He changed it from S-T-I-G to S-T-I-E-G, or S-T-E-I-G. Damn, I wrote this out, and I don't remember. Where's...
Whichever one he started with, he didn't end with.
S-T-I-E-G. Jesus Christ, superstar. It's pronounced the same way.
Okay.
Stieg, right? He didn't do this just for shits and giggles with pink pony clubs or silly sausages in mind. He did this because it wouldn't confuse him from another person also named Stieg Larsson. Now, dude, there are way too many coincidences with this person. Did you read this part by any chance?
Yeah.
They were both born in Skellefteå. They were also born basically around the same year, one in 1954 and the other in 1955. Our Stieg is a little older. They were also active in left-wing movements in the town of Umeå at the same time, and both became writers and well-known.
Something in the name.
What is known for the younger Stieg, what he had to say later, is that, excuse me, and this is translated from Swedish via Google, so a lot of these quotes are unfortunately this way, so I can't speak Swedish, barely speak English.
Yep.
Quote, I was included in a debut exhibition in the City Library, I believe in Umeå, in February 1973. It received positive reviews, and I was written about in the newspapers. The friends of the other Stieg Larsson thought it was him, and he probably found it embarrassing. I don't know how he would find it embarrassing, but, you know, I understand the mix-up. There was also probably a different reason that, like, some embarrassment happening, and this is, like, as fucking lefty as it can get. It's not nefarious, but, like, this is the pettiness that ideology gets that I always get really annoyed with. Now, quoting him again, I was part of a different... we were part of two different leftist movements. I was part of... says RSKFMLR and their association. He was part of the Trotskyites, which became eventually the Socialist Party. During the interview, the other Stieg Larsson confronted a rumor, which I thought was also funny, that I'm just going to add in, and it was that Stieg Larssons, the Stigs of the Larsons.
Stieg squared.
Stieg square. Is it Stigs Larsson or the Stieg Larssons? Basic like attorneys general or the attorney general? Yeah, right.
Canada geese or Canadian geese?
Well, one of them had to flip a coin in order for him to do it.
Add another letter.
Yeah, right. Or something of this sort. And he said it would be unlikely that I forgot it. Theoretically, it could have happened, but I don't think it so because I never tend to get drunk or anything, unquote, which is, I think, about the most Swedish thing I've ever read. I'm just naming this because, like, that Stieg Larsson was more famous than our Stieg Larsson for decades, right? So we have our boy, our Stieg Larsson, with an added E, with a table job at the largest news outlet in Sweden at this point. He has a stable job, a stable relationship. There was a person at TT named Kenneth Albrum who understood Larsson's potential as a person full of ideas and began to encourage him to write. Now I'm quoting an article on Red Wedge, The Work and Legacy of Stieg Larsson by Jeff Skinner. Quote, he started out with articles on such subjects as debunking the pseudoscience of New Age spiritualism, great, and interviews with authors of detective and crime novels, a childhood interest common to many people his age, which he never let go of. It was an interest that Albrum shared, and one occasion they discussed what might have happened to the heroes of their childhood favorites once they grown up. Larsson thought that Pippi Longstocking would have a hard time in her late 20s, unable to conform to modern society, involuntarily institutionalized, and possibly subjected to mental and physical violation, coming out of all of it into deeply bitter and bent on revenge. Unquote.
With such a random dark turn for a character.
I know.
It's like us being like, well, you know, Tommy Pickles, he had a falling out with Chucky in their early 20s.
Jesus, Chucky would have been the one who was fucked up.
Yeah.
I saw some of those things about Chucky recently. Holy shit. I mean, like, it's a fun thought experiment until it's not, right? Like, there you go. Stieg finds himself a hobby later, and I personally think this is like his most important achievement of his life. He began to seriously look into the right-wing extremists in Sweden. This wasn't just a passing fancy. It began when he was in grade school, but after the 70s passed, this became a lifelong mission. When he wasn't working for TT, he straight up mapped out right-wing extremism in Sweden, like all of it, basically. It's unbelievable the work he did. He continued his activism by helping start the anti-violence project, quote, Stop the Racism, unquote, in English at least. But some of the biggest work he did was exposing far-right activists and calling them out by name. Some of this work could potentially be found in the British anti-fascist or Antifa magazine called Searchlight, which he started working for in the mid-1980s. He exposed the rise of the white power movement and the British National Party. He became so well respected by the British government that he eventually spoke at Scotland Yard to give lectures about white nationalism.
I was very surprised by this part when I was reading it. I almost felt bad, and I think that's kind of going to be a theory about it, of like that this guy is. I didn't know much about this guy, and he did like a lot of big stuff, and it's just the fact that like we know him because of the books now, and I don't know. It's just. It's interesting how many different parts of his life you can then kind of see are in the book, which we'll go over, but definitely led an interesting life and took bits and pieces from it.
Absolutely, and like nothing to go against like the earlier parts of it. Like I'm not gonna say like you should go and fight in a guerrilla warfare or the Red Army, but like this is like a lot more important, which I will state in the script later why I thought so. Because like it wasn't a mistake that Sweden would have a rise in white nationalism either. Like it was an epicenter of the skinhead movement that arose in the 80s. Basically all of Europe. It wasn't just Europe. America had it too. I mean, like off script, the 90s in the skinhead movement in this country was pretty fucked up, right? Like Ruby Ridge is an example of it. I mean, what happened to the people in Ruby Ridge was still a horrible aggression. Like they shouldn't. The government that shouldn't have done what they did over there, no matter who you are.
Right.
But like still, like that wasn't an isolated incident. I'll leave it as that. The reason why I'm going through this because like I'm not like pro what they believe in, and definitely not pro of what the next person I'm talking of is Anders Breivik, a Norwegian white nationalist domestic terrorist who was like actively involved in this far right political ideology and in a political party that was in Norway at the time. Granted, not Sweden, I know, but he horribly massacred 77 people, killing 69 of them on a children's summer camp that was an isolated island, espousing the same kind of beliefs that Stieg was actively against, calling them out by name. So, like, I know this is a different country. It's a little bit of a stretch, but like exposing these people, in Britain and in Sweden at the time probably helped with reducing the number of assholes like this, because this is one of the most horrible incidents that ever existed.
Yeah, I mean, all this stuff, it's like there's something to be said that evil's done in the shadows, and when you shine a little bit of a light on it, I think it helps. So, I mean, it's definitely brave to call them out, and I know that it was dangerous, which you're going to get into in a second.
Yeah, and like it's not uncommon in the United States either, right? Like we talked about Ruby Ridge, but like I don't know. I would say something like 19 out of 20 of the mass shooters in this country at this point have far right political ideology. Unfortunately, in the United States, and we unfortunately have.
Yeah, there's a correlation for sure, I think.
Yeah. Just throwing shit out there. So these articles obviously affected Stig's personal life, the ones that he published. In Sweden, once you're wed, this is incredibly important. Once you've married someone, you have to submit paperwork that is open to the public. And the way that this paperwork is filed makes it seem like it's more accessible to the public than in other countries. I'm only able to compare that to the United States at the moment, right? You have to do something like this again in the U.S., but getting my marriage certificate was a challenge for me after being married. Don't get me wrong. However, it wasn't. It's kind of buried if somebody else wants to find it.
Right.
Right. Eva, his lifelong partner, stated that this is the reason why they never married. It was right.
And I'm sure in this time, like back then, it wasn't so much like social media, so it was probably even harder to find where people lived or info about them. So this was probably an easy source for people back then if they wanted to find something about someone, versus like nowadays, like obviously like social media and
right.
that shit. Like I could just Google someone's name and their address might pop up now. I'm sure that wasn't, that's not the case back then.
Yeah, everybody knows who your partners were at one point. Like,
right.
Yeah, because that's how it is. But yeah, like this was the only way if the paper trail worked. Mm-hmm. Eva, like I was saying, expressed that this is the only way that this was one of the ways that she was protected from the violent white supremacists who lived in Sweden that Stieg was exposing. In his own writing, Stieg believed that marrying his lifelong partner and having children would be a huge security risk for both of them, which makes sense to me, and we'll talk about it later on, like
Fair
in a
enough.
page or two. It wasn't an unfounded fear. This is Nick Cohen writing for The Guardian about his work in Searchlight. Quote, his reports for Searchlight included gruesome accounts of Swedish neo-Nazis raiding banks for funds and executing the anti-fascist trade unionist Bjorn Soderberg, which, like, how much more Scandinavian can I name?
Jesus.
Bjorn. Peter, Bjorn, and Soderberg.
That's like a cowboy being named like Hank Revolver.
Do you know that most, like, 50% of cowboys were black? Like, something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, and this is very limited on this, but still one of the most active cowboy groups. Have you ever seen the Detroit Cowboys?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. There's a Idris Elba movie about it, and then there's I think there's a Vice doc or something on it. Anyways, digression, but
no, seriously. Yeah, no, it's a digression, but like, I mean,
think of what groups were pushed west.
Exactly.
And you don't have to go that far to think that it was probably a melting pot more than Hollywood or whatever wants you to depict.
Yeah, it was a lot of black people, a lot of Mexicans. Like, I mean, makes sense. I mean, because it's also a horrible job.
Right.
But digression. So the assassination of Bjorn Soderberg. Every time he opened the door to walk out the street, he had to overcome the dread. So he by Stieg of that there may be men who would assassinate him for his exposés. Unquote. Now this may have never actually have happened. Like another leftist who was assassinated, like just because that happened doesn't mean another person would be. But like, it really isn't that hard to believe that, a far right skinhead shitbag dirt sucker cocksucker ever hugged him. Nobody ever hugged him in his life. Kind of kid, wannabe low life, probably suffers from serious erectile dysfunction, and definitely drives a stupid car. Could compensate, his asshole's worth of shit. But whatever. Yeah. Fuck you. I'm serious. Fuck you. There was a threat to his life, and the couple lived with the threats for at least 15 years, which is wild. But now we're well into the 90s, and Enema of the State has become an international sensation, and a young Travis, Tom, and Mark streak down the streets of West Hollywood to forever live in millennial dad rock history. What a great song.
Yeah.
What's my age again, right?
Yeah.
Moving back In 1991, his mother passed away. Oof.
Yeah.
This was due to breast cancer and an aneurysm, apparently.
Jesus.
She was only 54.
Yeah.
This is important.
She's like the
again.
oldest member of the... Well, yeah.
Well,
Continue.
not the oldest, but yeah. But it's only even like another person who passed away in the 50s. That's why I added that.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
In 1991, all right, again, he and another writer, Annalena Lodenius, published a book called Extra Hogan. Not like the Hulk Hogan, but Extra Hogan. Not, Hulk Hogan might have been exposed in this.
Listen to my book, brother.
Brother. The Extreme Right in English by Hulk Hogan, brother. He honestly might have been exposed on that one, which presented much of the independent research on the Swedish extreme right. This is like some of the publications we're talking about, right? Because of this, a couple years later, a neo-Nazi paper published an article that exposed both his name and Annalena's photos, addresses, telephone numbers, with the last lines in the article stating, quote, he should be allowed to continue his work, or if something should be done. This is like a translation, so it's a little awkward, but it means something else in Swedish. And because of this, the publisher got 4 months in jail time.
Yeah. I mean, it's libel and all that, and threats, and
yeah. I mean, we have that in the United States too. I know we believe that we have this like idea of like ultimate speech, but like if you threaten somebody like directly like that, you could go to jail. Granted, that was to protect the right from the left in the 70s, but whatever. I digress.
Yeah. Nope. The themes are familiar.
Yes. Due to his work and expertise in tracking the far right, he helped found a new Swedish magazine similar to the British Antifa publication we mentioned before, called Searchlight. Expo was launched in 1995, where he was the editor and contribute articles at first. He spent 2 years doing 2 full-time jobs, one at TT and one at Expo, which is nuts. Mm-hmm. He became the chief editor of the paper in 1999, the one that he helped Expo. On the Wayback Machine, you can find Expo's article page, and this is what the background said. Quote, in 1995, the white power music scene was at its peak, and Sweden was the world's largest producer of hate propaganda. The same year, 7 people were murdered in Sweden in Nazi-related violence, unquote, which is not something we talk about much. And also, we were young, right? I was 2.
Yeah.
But I remember the crazy, stupid documentaries about particularly the British and English white skinhead punk scene that happened, which is very the antithesis of punk, right? Like punks and ska and all that are very inclusive human beings.
Yes.
So I just remember that and being like, what the fuck is going on here?
And then they even made, to hit on the head, once again, welcome to random movie shit with Andrew. But if anyone is interested, Green Room is a fantastic, and that's literally a punk band against Nazis.
I honestly thought you were going to talk about Generation X.
Oh,
no, American History X.
Oh yeah,
Excuse
well
me.
that's a fantastic movie as well.
One of his best roles, right?
Edward Norton.
Edward Norton, yeah.
Yep.
Terrifying.
Yes,
but,
and Edward Furlong.
Oh,
when 2 Edwards.
Yeah, I forgot he was.
Were top billing. Yeah,
I saw that so many years ago and hated every minute of it, but it was a good movie.
Yep.
It was just so disturbing, like thinking that, like, holy shit, this is an American thing.
Well, if you haven't seen it, watch Green Room. It's Captain Picard, but as a villain. So it is.
Really?
Yes, Charles Xavier is a terrifying villain in it. Patrick Stewart.
I totally believe that. Patrick Stewart's one of the best actors to ever exist.
Yes. Well,
Sir Patrick Stewart.
Excuse me.
Think he's up when we talk about him.
The Kindle King knighted him.
The Proctor of Posey, the Kindle King himself. The Ward of Patrick Stewart. This is the next one.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Throughout all of this pretty badass work, he began developing a concept that would end up being his the most famous works, right? Like this work that everybody knows about him. He was still working on the background. It is believed that he wrote the first chapter of the Millennium series, not Millennial, excuse me. That's my
A lot of those read them, though.
Yeah, all right. In 1997. However, he really began to undertake this writing venture 5 years later in 2002, not 2022. That's 3 years ago already. By the next year, he had already completed the manuscripts of the first 2 novels and was well underway for his third. The first publisher that he wanted to bring these books to rejected them not once but twice, which was a mistake.
Yes.
After showing what material he had to one of Expo's publishers, or Expo's actual publisher, a man named Robert Ashberg, he recommended the first 2 chapters to be sent to a Swedish publication, Norstedts Forlag. The editors read them in one sitting and accepted the publication. They liked it so much that they signed a contract for 3 books, which is unheard of for any unpublished author, regardless of how much you've written before.
Because once again, and so that's something, when I was reading this beforehand, I was shocked. You know, you think of these famous authors, right? And we're going to get into the books, obviously. You think that this is like, oh my God, they've done this for their whole life. They've written, it's that Stephen King mindset that I have, where it's, well, if you're a famous author, you must have written hundreds of books. But it's like, no, this guy didn't start until, I was in freaking elementary school.
He was in his late 40s when he finally sent them out.
Right.
Yeah, he was I wouldn't say prolific. He was industrious.
Yeah, like he was important, but not in the novel sense. Like the being an author as I thought he would be.
To the point where he was so good at what he was writing, or at least, well, I wouldn't say good. Let's say that he handed all 3 books to the Swedish publisher all at once, which is impressive too. Mm-hmm. Like he just gave them the manuscripts according to this legend. A person named Stephen T. Murray was commissioned to translate them in English. They basically had a hunch that this was going to be successful, and it took a few years for an American or an English publisher to actually pick it up, and it ended up being Alfred A. Knopf, but they used that same translation. Mm-hmm. So anything before we get into the Millennium series at all, or his works?
No, fire away.
Before we get into that series itself, I am contractually obligated to talk more about Stig's personal life. Not really, just we need to talk about it.
We need to talk about it.
Because he was a man of conviction. He was obviously willing to sacrifice himself for what he believed was, for him, the right cause, fighting for equality throughout his life, exposing hatred for what it was. He was someone with a moral compass and a strong sense of justice, and he never broke away from the belief system that he had his entire life. You don't necessarily need to believe in the same belief system he had. I don't have an exhaustive list of his political leaves, but I'm sure I definitely fundamentally disagree and agree with some of the theory he had, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's definitely things that we would both say if we were having a conversation with him, we would disagree with. What I would say is that the level of consistency in the fight he had is laudable, right? Like that is in of itself something you respect in somebody, right?
Yes. And as you're going to probably go on, he put so much effort into that well, continue. It's on the...
Yeah, and I had to shoehorn something in here as an example. Like we mentioned Eritrea, but he helped out the new Jewel movement in the island nation of Grenada, which, again, another Marxist-Leninist movement who overthrew the U.S. puppet government when the prime minister was on vacation visiting the U.S. Like the U.S. eventually invaded Grenada in the 80s again, because this coup happened in 1979, but like it helped set up the Swedish-Grenadian relationship. Like
if this guy was American, it would be like he'd be like the most like you definitely work for the CIA. Like I feel like he's like one of those things. Like has been so many places, has worked with so many groups that you'd be like, I wonder. But obviously, it's just based off of his beliefs.
I'm going to say right now, like, there's a few things probably working for him. First off, he doesn't have kids. Second off, he's not married, so he doesn't have any of this. And then third,
Boy, if we didn't have kids, we'd be firing mortars in Africa too, right?
Yeah, right. In Eritrea, holy shit. Yeah. And like, thirdly, like, we also like probably didn't have any real debt, right? Like, that's another big one too. Like, he rented all his life, so like, it's a different lifestyle, right? Yeah. But yeah, damn, this guy, he seemed like a nice guy from everything I also read too from him. Like, I've read a lot of things about different authors, and everybody who talked about him seemed to really enjoy his presence. This is what his father said about him, quote, "Above all, he was friendly. He respected people. It didn't make a difference between king and outcast. He was ambitious. Stig was a person who started things. He always had the attitude that nothing was impossible," unquote, which is great. Like, right? Like, I mean, we don't really often talk about very positive people on this podcast, but damn.
Yeah, breath of fresh air.
He was clearly prodigious, and with the unbelievable work ethic, it also came with sacrifices, right? So we're going to start getting a little dark, unfortunately. We already talked about him not marrying his lifelong partner, Eva, for security reasons. They also never had children, like I said. His fandom website states he was a classic workaholic. He would smoke up to 60 hand-rolled cigarettes a day, skipping most meals, and constantly pulling all-nighters to get his work done.
Cut what I said about fresh air.
I can't imagine smoking 6 hand-rolled cigarettes.
Yeah.
60.
He's just like a grizzled detective, just like black coffee, cigarettes, and finding the truth.
He was clearly not the healthiest man, right? And with his family history that we've already talked about, his grandfather and his mother dying in their 50s, I mean, maybe he probably should have paid more attention to his health, because on November 9th, 2004, while he was climbing the stairs up to his work, he suffered a massive heart attack. He was only 50 years old when he was passed away, and he was interred at the Högalid Church Cemetery in Stockholm.
There's a cigarette lit in his honor that never goes out.
I mean, honestly, like, if there's like a anywhere around there, you should just hand-rolled cigarettes and put them on a shirt.
Yeah.
We approve that.
Some people leave flowers at graves. They just leave a Winston. Yes.
Did you get a chance to listen to the Herbert Huncke series that we did? No,
not yet. No.
We don't know if he has a grave or not, but if this man Herbert Huncke ever had a grave, we need to leave little pink horses at his, like, little like My Little Ponies at his grave. So this one needs to be hand-rolled cigarettes, which honestly is fitting. It was around 10 months later, in August 2005, when the first book in the series was published in Sweden. All of his work, obviously, is published posthumously. The first book in the series that was published in English happened in 2008. Mm-hmm. They were all basically instant successes.
Yep.
Yeah, right?
I was shocked. Like, I guess I didn't realize that this guy died. So when I first looked it up and I saw his date of death, I was like, either these books are much older than I thought, or this is a typo. And I was like, oh, no, it's all after he was gone.
This meant that the Larsson estate, from book sales and other royalties, had to go somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. Eva, I don't know how it is pronounced, I'm sorry, in Swedish, the person he was with for 32 whole years, ever since they were 18, unfortunately, she was due none of these royalties. This is because when a person dies in Sweden without a will, as he didn't have, all their assets go to the next of kin by law. And since the couple never married, she's not considered the next of kin. Just fucked. Right.
Let me dust off the lawyer for a second. Everyone get a will. Seriously. I don't care how healthy or young or old or whatever. Just get a freaking will.
Yeah, Christine and I are on the business of getting it, and like nothing of our will is different than what we would have done anyway by law, right?
Right.
But it's easier, right?
Yes.
Like, it's just like, okay, this is my intention. Sure, I would have gone to her anyway, but like, duh. And so we were saying that, and since they were never married, like she's literally not entitled to any of this, like at all.
Yeah, that's crazy.
This isn't hard to imagine in the U.S. because there are certain states where this would be the same.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think in Vermont, where we live in one of those states where common law marriages would protect a partner in this situation. Like Christina was technically common law married with me after 6 months because we lived together for 6 months. We had certain bills together, and she was underneath my health insurance.
Yeah.
So like maybe it would have protected her.
Still wouldn't get her a real ID, but
Stieg also had a will at one point in the 70s. He wrote out a will that all his money should go towards the Socialist Party that he was part of, then the Communist Party, but it was never ratified, which would have been fucking wild.
Yeah.
But because it was never ratified, nobody was there to sign it. It's just like a funny alternative history that could have happened.
Right, but I think if that history did happen, there would never be a movie about it.
No.
Because then there would be movies and stuff pretty much funding a party.
Yeah, it was back in the 70s too. So, like, currently all the assets and royalties from the Millennium series goes to Stig's brother and father, who are responsible for his estate. This has sparked a legal battle, which is still in dispute today, 20 years after the first book was published. It's dubious if Eva will ever see any of the money based on Swedish law. She's claimed that Stieg hardly spoke to his brother and father, which probably was true, but there's at least one email between Stieg and Joachim, his brother, explaining he just sold his books off to a major publisher. Eva has, which are the books we're talking about, right? Eva has also gone and wrote a memoir called, quote, "These are the things I want you to know about Stieg Larsson and me," unquote, which the title of the book comes from a love letter sent back from Stieg when he wrote it. Like he was out in Eritrea, which is, just more proof about their long-standing relationship. She was also offered €2 million, which at that point was $3.3 million by the family to sell out of court, but she turned it down. And though she probably will never see any money, like I was saying, from her partner's posthumous publications, I can't really blame her for fighting for more, realistically, especially since by 2015, more than 80 million copies were sold of his books alone. I don't know how much that money that has made because the quick research I did after I sent you this script didn't bring any credible sources from it. Like I really tried, and one said he was worth $3.3 billion, and I'm like, fucking Google, stop hallucinating. That's ridiculous.
That's crazy.
Yeah, no, but I'm sure we
1 billion per book. I mean, 37 languages. I'm sure it sold a shit ton,
but we know the billionaires who he came after, like with books, right? Like they're pretty easy to find. Yeah.
You want to hear the most here's a complete side note. You want to hear the most surprising, maybe not surprising billionaire I just found out? The guy from Morgan & Morgan. is a fucking billionaire.
Really?
The Injury Law Group. The guy is worth billions. Anyways.
Well, there's something going on there. Okay. Well, that is the story of Stieg Larsson, how the publication happened in his trilogy, right? Like, let's end by talking about the books themselves, some of the supposed influences, some of the lore of the novels, and the movies. So in English, the book is actually known as The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, right? Like we know The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Mm-hmm. That's not what the direct Swedish translation is, which is Men Who Hate Women, which comes from the female protagonist, Lisbeth Salander. It comes from something that she states or references that she doesn't hate men. She hates men who hates women, right? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of nuts that they changed it that much.
And I mean, we'll get into it probably a little bit more, but she is, I think what's great about these books is, yes, there's the male protagonist as well, but she kind of steals the show a lot of the time, and I think became a very popular character for kind of being that even in the the female protagonist sense, she's kind of against the grain with the look and the vibe and stuff like that.
Yeah, we can talk about more about her later, but one of my favorite scenes in the movie adaptation, and it happened basically in both, but the one I remembered more vividly was when the English version of Lisbeth was sleeping with Daniel Craig, and she gets off on him when they were in that cabin and just stops having sex and walks away afterwards. And it was like, I was confused as a young male looking at that and going, oh, wait, no, she just ruled that scene. Like, that was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like...
No, we'll get into... we'll get into that more in a sec, I'm sure. But
yeah, Lisbeth is a badass, right? And the Swedish publishers wanted to change the name of this like title, as well as the actual size of the dragon tattoo on the cover, from her entire back to just on like a shoulder, which Stieg refused, and they respectfully accepted this refusal, at least in Sweden. Obviously, though, the English version changed the title, which I think he didn't really have much options for that.
Yeah.
The second book in his trilogy, I mean, honestly, I don't think it would have fucking sold as much either,
No,
unfortunately.
if I saw that title on, I'd be curious, but I wouldn't, anyways, think it was a best-selling novel.
Yeah, and like I think that just kind of shows the differences of culture there, unfortunately. The second book in his trilogy is the same name in English as in Swedish, but the third they changed again from the girl who kicked the hornet's nest to directly, this is what it's translated in Swedish, quote, the castle in the air that was blown up, unquote, which objectively worst name. Yeah. I don't know how it sounds in Swedish, but the English one works better on this one. So we're going to speak of Lisbeth now, right? Lisbeth Salander. Or Salander. Sorry. I don't know.
Salamander.
That's
That's all I can think of.
Same. I think that has to be a direct. All right. It's widely believed that she is based on that thought experiment that Larsson had when imagining Pippi Longstocking would be as an adult. I guess.
She's a hacker with no eyebrows. Instantly Pippi Longstockings.
That's at least one portion of inspiration. And like, honestly, that's more innocent than the second part, because we're going to get into something dark. According to the ABC News and also BBC, the other one is a little bit darker, and I'm going to quote ABC here. Quote, Larsson had his own dark secret. At the age of 15, he witnessed a gang rape and never intervened, according to lifelong friend Kurdo Baxi. Days later, written with guilt, Larsson asked the victim for her forgiveness, but she refused. That girl was Lisbeth, the name later given to the tattooed Asperger's inflicted Lisbeth Salander, heroine of Larsson's 3 novels. The guilt over failing to act haunted Larsson his entire life and fueled the subject of his crime novels, according to Baxi, who wrote Stieg Larsson, Our Days in Stockholm, a memoir devoted to setting the record straight about Larsson's real-life commitment to social justice, unquote. Couple things here. First off, Asperger's isn't considered like something that in the medical terms is taken as seriously as back in the day. People don't actually have Asperger's. They're in the autism spectrum at this point. But they didn't know it when he was writing it. Secondly, Kurdo Baxi worked with him at Expo in the 90s. So they might have discussed this at one point, but like this is much later when he was writing the memoirs than what the event would have happened, right? So there needs to be some level of dubiousness to this credibility. Not to say that it didn't happen, they didn't speak of this, but Kurdo believes that a couple things happened that would influence the plot. First off, 2 murders that influenced the plot. One of Melissa Nordal, a model who was killed by her boyfriend, and Fadime Sahidal, a Swedish-Kurdish woman killed by her father as a victim of an honor crime, which they happened in 2001 or 2002, respectively. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why I'm saying this in a sus-ass like tone is that Kurdo just seems surprised that his colleague was able to produce these novels, like, and write it. And he's not the only one. Another one of his Expo colleagues, Anders Hellberg, basically stated that Larsson could not write the trilogy because he just wasn't a good writer, which it's salacious. And frankly, both of them seem a little bit petty and like reek of jealousy.
Yeah.
I will add here that there were comments made by his partner, even Eva, that made it implied that some kind of co-authorship probably happened during the editing process by the publishers. But like, even if that's the case, that's just normal.
Right. Especially when it's translating, like,
or even not, like in their case, like he passed away before the book was, like published, and 10 months later isn't an abnormal amount of time to accept book, right? Like a manuscript and then publish it. But that's a lot of time to change things.
Yeah.
I'm just willing to believe that he wrote at least the vast majority of this content because there's just a lot of proof that he did. He wrote the trilogy clearly, like he gave it to the publishers. He completed most of a draft for the fourth book that he wanted. He also wrote synopsis for a fifth and a sixth, and he wrote notes about having a total of 10 in the series, which was in Eva's possession at the time of his death, which is nuts.
Yeah, what could have been.
I'm not sure if this book will see the light of day or any of these books will. What I know is that the publishers have now hired 2 different authors to write 2 other trilogies. The second trilogy already completed and written by somebody named David Lagerkrantz, and the second still needing to finish the trilogy off with the final book by Karen Smirnoff. Have some fun tonight. And yeah, like they happened a few years after the publication of the last book, right?
Right. And it's one of those things, like, it's always a weird thing. Do you just leave it be, or do you do it in honor of someone? I mean, that's kind of like, when a beloved actor or actress dies, do you recast that role? What would that be, doing it justice or injustice? Or, it's always kind of a weird, sticky subject.
Especially now that AI is existent, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up Shrek for this one because it's a good example, and we should have the dichotomy of this and talk about the Dark Knight, right? Mm-hmm. Where Shrek, most of not what's his name, not Mike Myers, but goodness golly gosh,
right, Chris Farley Shrek was based off of Chris Farley, right?
Yep. Yeah, so they had a bunch of scenes already with Chris Farley's voice, but like, what if they used Chris Farley's voice? We wouldn't have a Scottish Shrek, right?
Like,
honestly, Mike Myers nailed that.
Yeah.
But then again, we go back and have the conversation about the Dark Knight, and a few of Heath Ledger's scenes were unfinished in his passing, and they had to finish them for him, right?
Well, same thing with Gladiator. Gladiator is one of the most convincing CGI movies, and no one realized it because what's his face, Proximo, that actor, friggin' died of alcohol poisoning like halfway through the movie.
Really?
Yeah. Well, shit, what's his name? The Oliver or whatever. He was in Oliver. And so there's scenes where it's just his face is straight up CGI'd and you wouldn't notice the difference. But we could do a whole thing on that guy. If he wrote anything, that would be an interesting one. But case in point, it's more common than you think, kind of this, do you carry on or do you just leave it be when someone's no longer here?
Tony Soprano's mom is another example, right?
Mm-hmm.
She died right before. Well, they wanted to kill her off anywhere because she was very ill.
Oh God, I wanted her to kill her off.
She sucked as a character. She was a great actress, but the last few scenes were cut and edited. They weren't even CGI. They just like cut and edited and manipulated, which is nuts.
Yep.
We digress, right?
Always.
I've only read the first trilogy by Stieg, not the other 2 trilogies. Personally, I really enjoyed the books that he wrote. The plot is complex, well, all the books, and the books are driven by actions performed by the characters, right? And like it progresses in a way that like you are constantly captivated. There are a lot of similarities between Stig's life and the male protagonist, Mikael Blomkvist, who was an investigative journalist who was wrongfully accused of libel and lost the case that damaged the reputation of the publication he co-owned called Millennium, hence the books. The books read, at least in English, like elevated airport novels in me, which there's nothing wrong with that. I just thought that Stieg did a good job introducing conflict, producing sufficient twists, and wrapping things up nicely at the end of each novel. I will say my one bit of criticism is by the third novel, there's like points where I went and audibly said, come on now. Are you kidding me?
Suspensions of disbelief.
Which is fine, right? Like just noir in the modern age. And like there was serious work done to underline the undercurrents of social and political issues while simultaneously not thinking too deep of these issues. I'm not like saying they're horrible books at all. I very much enjoyed them. Like they were page turners, right? You read the first book, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know why I didn't read the second and third, and now I feel like I have to, but I also now feel like I need to read the first again. So maybe that'll be one of the series this summer. I'll dust off the old Kindle, folks.
Honestly, if you watch the movie again, you'll be able to read the second and third. The second and third books are much more connected than the first and the second, you know, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just one of the reasons why, like, I was surprised by his friends saying that he couldn't have possibly written these. It's like, yeah, he could. They're not. It took a lot of work.
Well, especially because, like you said, the connections it has to him.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's like the star basketball player, his friends being like, I'm shocked he wrote a book about being on a traveling basketball squad. It's like, well.
He practiced, right? Like, he practiced layups all his life, and then, like, you're shocked that he can dunk. Like,
right,
like,
exactly.
or something
Fair
like
enough.
that. Yeah, right? Like, these things are not, like, mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course they were adapted to the big screen. The Swedish movies have all three of them, right? All three of the books have been adapted. I would say in English, right? There's only one. I would say the Swedish version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is much darker. Some people prefer that one over the other. I thought they were both good.
Yeah.
How'd you like the Daniel Craig one, man?
I like the Daniel Craig one, and funny enough, I actually watched it at our alma mater. I was thinking about it. I was like, where did I see this movie? And it was a Friday before a rugby game when we were staying good little boys. And and so I remember watching that with like old podcast guest Zach Perro. So anyways, I like the movies or the movie. I thought it had a pretty good cast. The actual theme of the book, like I found interesting, and I kind of the people that played the characters in the movie, I could see that happening. I mean, I think Christopher Plummer's pretty awesome actor. Shitty behind the scenes during Sound of Music. Look into that, people.
Well, that's a dark one.
And
deep cut too.
And the Rooney Mara was Lisbeth, and of the Mara family for the New York Giants fans out there.
I had no clue that she was like directly. I would say that the female character in the Swedish movie adaptation is a stronger character in like the physical sense, and they made her weaker and scrawnier, but not necessarily not weaker, scrawnier, not necessarily weaker, and they did that intentionally in the English one, and more silent, which is even crazier to say that. Like,
you want to hear Andrew's random movie fact of the day for these?
What?
So the actress that plays the Swedish version, I think her name's like Noomi Rapace or something like that. Her husband is I think a stunt actor, and he was a Bond villain in Daniel Craig's James Bond. So I always just found that humorous that he's the American version, and just like these weird little Hollywood connections. And there's my movie Snapple fact of the day for you guys.
There you go. Yeah, I'm curious as to how the other three went in the Swedish version. Obviously, the first movie was a Swedish adaptation, right? And I remember seeing that with my mom, and I was too young to see a rape scene with my mom.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was whatever.
It just the general story of, I mean, at least of the first one is pretty crazy. It's obviously the themes of like the rich and powerful and the dark side of it, which once again, there's connections in modern day.
Well, it's a good transition because I wanted to end this episode before plugs and sources by quoting Eva Gabrielson in her memoir about this partner's work. Quote, "The trilogy allowed Stieg to denounce everyone who he loathed for their cowardice, their irresponsibility, and their opportunism. The couch potato activists, the sunny day warriors, the fair weather skippers who picked and chose their causes, false friends who used him to advance their own careers, unscrupulous company heads and shareholders who wrangled themselves huge bonuses. Seen in this light, Stieg couldn't have had any better therapy for what ailed his soul than writing his novels," unquote. Yeah. Any last thoughts?
No, as always, this is another interesting literary character. There's a lot of real world activism and stuff, and it's almost depressing in a way. But sometimes if you close your eyes, you don't need to necessarily know what decade this happened in, because there's
I mean, it happened in our lifetime on top of everything else.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, I definitely am going to have to dive more into the books now, and was overall just impressed with everything this guy did, and once again, died at such a young age, but had a lot of impacts.
Yeah. And if you want, I have the other two books in hardcover, not hardcover. I have one softcover and one hardcover, but I know you're the King, the Proctor of Posey, and what was the Stewart of? God.
I'm really susceptible to paper cuts, guys. If I turn pages, I might hurt myself.
No, there's nothing wrong with the one on the Kindle. I just can't read them. My eyes are fucking blind to begin with, and it just hurts. Somebody told me that as a father and like a parent, you're gonna want a Kindle, and I'm like, no, I don't.
No, you want to get away from as much screens. No.
Well, I mean, whatever. Those screens are not supposed to be bad for your eyes, but it's just
like the newspaper style ones. But yeah, absolutely.
Just one of those. It's like, I've never liked a screen to read from one. Why would I change now?
Give us a month, and Phil and I are going to be doing one on like a children's book author as we just get deeper and deeper.
There's so many dark ones.
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss hated kids, allegedly.
2 hours on Sandra Boynton.
So I'm going to plug the Patreon, Lost in the Library podcast on Patreon. Any questions, please send it to lostinthelibrarypodcast@gmail.com. Follow us again, Lost in the Library, there on Instagram. Substack, I have my work up there at Fil Deptula. It's just my name. These are the sources. Obviously, the 3 books in the Millennium series that I read by Stieg Larsson. Jesus Christ. I spent this entire time not mispronouncing his name, and then this is the last time I did it. Quote, there are things I want you to know about Stieg Larsson and me, but the memoir by Eva Gabrielson. Read Stieg Larsson, the bestseller socialist militant, a Guardian article by Nick Cohen, another Guardian article called Stieg Larsson spent a year training Eritrean guerrillas. This is by Homa Khalili. Expo's page, bunch of articles there. All of them actually, honestly, found on sites. Sorry, the archive sites found on the Expo page. 2 interviews that I had to translate. One is the story of Stieg Larsson. I'm sorry I didn't write down who wrote this one because it was hard to find, and the other one is Stieg Larsson. He changed the spelling himself by Abs Han Formsman. Yeah, I have the web addresses, but damn. Thriller with a Radical Message by Tristan Bronson on socialistworker.com or .org. The Work and Legacy of Stieg Larsson by Jeff Skinner on redwedgemagazine.com, another socialist site. You should take them with a grain of salt always when it comes down to these political sites, but it was good to know, like, get some background information that he was doing. A word from Stieg Larsson's partner in Would-Be a Clouder by Elaine Scigliano. It's a New York Times archive. Again, if you read anything by New York Times, though, you need to also take that with a grain of salt. Toronto.com article, Life After Larsson by Jeff Pevery. An ABC News article, Stieg Larsson silent as real life Lipson was raped. Another a few articles on StiegLarsson.com, including his legacy, background, Millennium Trilogy, Expo magazine, his work, and a few Wikipedia articles to just like get some foundation which were Stieg Larsson, Eva Gabrielson, Millennium series, and Elizabeth Salander. Wow. We did this for an hour and a half.
Salamanders. The girl with the salamander tattoo.
Basically, it's got to be close enough, right? Like salamander and salander has to be like the same word in Norwegian or Swedish, right?
JD Salamander.
And for that, I want everybody to imagine Holden Caulfield as a salamander.
60 hand-rolled cigarettes on a merry-go-round.
The catcher in the rye is just a tiny salamander at the end of the field, right?
You got it.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Phil.